this lesson, we're going to talk about how to find spiritual lessons in Bible stories. Everyone loves a good story, and the Bible is just full of them. As a matter of fact, it's the source of so many different books and movies and songs and plays that you know a lot of these Bible stories without even reading the Bible. You can see a picture, and it can make you think of the story behind it. You take a look at baby Moses in the river Nile in Egypt. You see young David fighting Goliath with nothing but a sling in his hand. Or you can see Jesus walking the streets of Jerusalem, healing a blind man. Or how about Moses parting the Red Sea? Hollywood appreciates the value of a good story too. And there's been hundreds of movies based on these Bible stories. So we're all very familiar with them. But there's more to the story than just a story. Sure, they chronicle the history of the Bible. They tell us about these people. They develop the characters and help us to understand who's there. But the real important point, the real importance behind these Bible stories is that they teach us spiritual lessons. That's what we want to talk about today. If we spend a little bit of time looking closely at these Bible stories, we can learn great spiritual lessons. To do so, you have to read all of them. You can't just look at the fun ones, the interesting ones, the easy ones. You also have to spend some time looking at some of the uncomfortable stories. Some of the stories that really make you question what you think and what you believe and how you should act in certain situations. The Bible tells us that all Scripture is given by the inspiration of God. It's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction. Things that sometimes don't feel that comfortable. For instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. If we spend some time and look at what's behind these stories, they'll change us. They'll make us into better men, better people, able to better serve God. Jesus was completely clear about these stories. He wants us to understand that they're not just stories. It's not like Aesop's fables. It's not like a novel with a bunch of things dreamed up. These were actual people experiencing real events, working through real situations, and interacting with a real God, a live God. So when Jesus refers to the things in the Old Testament, he doesn't talk about stories or lessons. He talks about Moses, the man, who actually stood there lifting up a pole with a bronze snake on the pole. He talks about the time that they were actually before the ark, when they were eating and drinking, when Noah was on the ark and the people were destroyed in the flood. Real people. And he tells us, I say to you, you should be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment. He's talking about a real place on a real day when fire came out of heaven and Lot's family was destroyed. I want to spend a few minutes before we start and talk to anyone in the room who happens to have any children or grandchildren. Teach them these Bible stories. The value that they're going to get in their life. The change that will come, the completeness of their character by learning these Bible stories is great. The Bible tells us, these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart. You shall carefully teach them to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise up. What are the advantages of teaching your children these stories? What things should you teach them? Well, first of all, simply teach them the books of the Bible. Teach them all 66 books of the Bible in the right order. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. That'll be an invaluable tool for them as they get older and read the Bible and can understand where things are and what order things come in. Also, teach your kids all the major Bible stories. They're going to receive so much value. Their characters will be molded and shaped so much by the stories of David, by the stories of Esther, by the stories of Sarah and Moses and Abraham. Take a little time and work with them and help them to memorize some important verses in the Bible. Jesus faced temptation all alone in the wilderness, and he had nothing with him except his memory and the verses he had memorized. And those verses is what helped him fight against his temptations. And then take them out and let them actually experience what the Bible teaches and how it really comes when the rubber hits the road. Help them, take them to visit the sick, to spend some time with the elderly, to help those who are in need. The change and the character development and the depth and the breadth of what your children will become when they become adults from spending some time as a child with the Bible is amazing. Let's take a look at our first example of a story and the real spiritual lesson behind it. You've seen the movie Cecil B. DeMille in The Parting of the Red Sea. Let's talk a bit about the story and what was actually happening. Israel had been in bondage in Egypt. They'd been slaves for hundreds of years. And God sends a deliverer. God sends Moses. And Moses comes, and the process of the deliverance is not easy. It comes about very hard through all these plagues and these troubling times. But finally, after 10 plagues, Pharaoh lets the Israelites leave. And they leave and they head out. And no sooner do they get out in the desert when Pharaoh changes his mind. And he sends his army after them. So we catch up with Israel, and they've walked as far as the Red Sea, and now they're trapped. In front of them is this giant ocean, and behind them is this horde of soldiers charging after them on horses and chariots, bearing down on them. Now at that point, they were faced with a decision. We can give up. We can surrender. Pharaoh's army isn't here to destroy us. They're simply here to bring us back to Egypt. We can go back into slavery, or we can move forward in faith. God provided salvation for them. And that's what they did. Now, Corinthians says, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea." Well, this connection here to this Bible story in this word baptism brings it to us. Now there's a lesson here for each one of us. You see, Israel had come to a decision point. They'd walked out to the edge, and they had in front of them this impossible and incrossable sea. And then behind them they had, certain death. Their choice was to return to slavery or to go through this water in faith. We find ourselves in that same position. This is true when we come to the waters of baptism and consider baptism. We can at that point choose to return to the slavery of sin, or we can move forward and be saved from the water through the waters of baptism. Another lesson for us comes from the story of David and Goliath. You kind of remember the big parts of the story. There was a man named Goliath who was from Gath. He was over 9 feet tall. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." And David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." So David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the head. So we're all familiar with the story of David and Goliath, and David killing this giant with a stone from his sling. But if you keep reading, some more interesting things come out. It gets a bit gory, though. David ran, and he stood over the Goliath, and he took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. And after he killed him, he cut off the head with the sword. He took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put the Philistine's weapons in his own tent. Well, why did he bring the head to Jerusalem? He didn't want to put it on his mantle. He brought it to Jerusalem and he buried it. And where he buried it is a place that's called now the place of the skull, or Golgotha. Well, flash forward hundreds of years, and you see Jesus. Bearing his cross, he went out to a place called the place of a skull. which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and 2 others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. The spiritual lesson is easy for us to see, and it's valuable for us. You see, David faced the giant that had taunted him and taunted his people, and he destroys it. Well, Christ faced that same giant. Christ faced sin that was taunting him and taunting his people, and he destroyed it. And now that same lesson about this little man fighting against a giant applies to us. We face our own personal giants. We struggle with our own sins. And it's our job to follow in the example of David, to follow in the example of Christ, and to fight them, and to conquer them, and defeat them. These Bible stories are great. Spend a few minutes teaching them to your children when your children are young. They contain awesome spiritual lessons for each one of us. Even as adults, they provide a foundation for Bible study and for us to see all the echoes and the cross-references and the symbols and the signs and the foreshadowing that the Bible has for us.